Okay, well, I think we can start. So we may turn on our camera. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I am Gözde Nur Özdem Öztürk. Today, I'm going to moderate this session for you for the subject of new IPPF, the new standards and its challenges and opportunities on quality assessments. And our speakers are with us, Mr. Warren Hirsch and Martin Grobler. Warren is the director of IA Global Quality Services, and Martin is director of IA Professionals. Hi, Martin. Hi, Warren. Welcome again. First of all, for our participants who may not know you well, so I would like to introduce you and your professional experiences. Warren, as far as we know, you have over 40 years experiences in internal auditing. Actually, not only internal auditing, but also internal control, corporate governance, IT, process management, and risk management, right? And you conducted many external quality assessments in these previous years in many industries. So I would like to ask you again, who is Warren and how was your career path in this during 40 years?
40, I can't believe it's 40 years. But anyway, that's what happens. It goes quick. Well, I started in internal auditing, and then over the years, I've had many different roles. Chief audit executive. I was assistant controller at NYNEX. I was the chief audit executive for New Jersey Transit, as well as the acting CFO for 6 months. Spent 4 years as a controller for the bus company in Orlando, and that got me back into the IIA. I was on the standards board for 11 years and the IIA Public Sector Committee for 3 years. And I was the president of the Philadelphia chapter, and many audit jobs through the years, fraud investigations, doing quality assessments. And now I'm the director of quality services for the IIA, where we do over 100 or so quality assessments each year.
Very impressive, Warren. So we will talk about your team, your quality assessment team. But before we come to there, Martin, how about you? We know that you have also over 25 years experiences in internal auditing, but especially on external quality assessments, right? In public and private sectors. So you are also giving some trainings to internal auditors, some training materials. So how about you? How was this 25 years in auditing?
Thank you, Gosner. Yes, it's moving closer to 30 years now, and time just seems to be flying by way too quickly. And I get a bit self-conscious when I say 30 years. So, Warren, I don't know how you feel when you say 40, but but yes, I started off my career in 1996 at the company called South African Marine Corporation, or SAF Marine, whereafter I went over to the Foschini Group for as an IT auditor, and soon afterwards left and went to live in the UK for a couple of years, where I worked with the Department of Transport for the UK. Came back to South Africa in 2004 and started my own internal audit firm, specializing in internal auditing, but mostly, internal audit consulting services, or advisory services as it's called now. And throughout the period, been doing training, facilitation, and for the past 10, 15 years, I've been specializing in external quality assessments. But my background is also very much in terms of governance, risk management, control processes for organizations, and I've been enjoying it. For the past 3 years, I've been a member of the IA Standards Board, and prior to that, I was also a member of the Professional Ethics Committee for the Institute of Internal Auditors. Currently also on the task team that's busy with the development of the new QA manual. So I'm looking forward to those questions as well. I don't know how much I can divulge on that, but I'll I'll speak to them as we get there.
Well,
We
I'll defer to you, Martin, on the divulge. And I'm also involved with the new QA manual. We drafted the first manual from a couple of the assessors that we have in our department, and that's what they're working through on the task force. And I'm on the advisory committee for the QA manual. So I'll defer to Martin on how much we can divulge. We can talk offline on it.
good. Good. Very inspiring. So thank you for all these explanations. Today we are going to talk about the new standards and actually specifically its effect on external quality assessment, maybe quality assessment, but specifically external quality assessments. But before we start, dear IAM members, I have a very good news for you. I am very happy to announce this. Most of you may hear this the first time. Today, IAA Turkey will start to give this external quality assessment services with the coordination of collaboration of Warren's team, IAA Global. So it's a very new initiative for us. Maybe you may have some questions about this topic because it's very related to our subject today. If you have any, you can just put your questions on QA session and we can just answer them at the end of the session. So let's move on our main topic then. As you know, this year I issued an update on IPPF, including internal standards, global internal standards, and the new standards may contain many updates. We will talk about it, but it has specifically effect on quality assessments. Because it's generally emphasized on demonstrating not only conformance but also performance. It's very important for us. We will talk today. So we will gain some knowledge and insights on how these new standards may impact our future plans about these assessment reviews and how we can successfully prepare during this period. So in the beginning, Warren, Martin, as you know, we have prepared two questions, mini survey for our participants in order to understand the awareness level of the new standards. Please scan the QR codes on the screen to see, we will see your answers. We have two questions. This is the first one. Are you familiar with or you have read the new standards? So you can choose no, somewhat have seen it, have read them, or totally know it. So we are waiting for your answers. Answers are coming. Yeah, Warren, I may share the screen. Maybe it will be better to see the results simultaneously. Thank you. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So for the answers we got till now, it seems that most of the people say somewhat they have seen them. Yeah, the answers are coming, still coming. So what do you think, Warren, Martin? What do you think about these results?
I think that's consistent with what we've seen, that most folks at this point in the year are somewhat familiar with the standards. And I think the urgency will get there as we move closer to the end of the year. Martha, any other thoughts?
No, I agree with you, Warren. I expected about more or less to see this kind of trend. And I agree further that as the year moves along, I think the table will move more towards the right to the have read them and totally side. Or at least I hope so.
Right.
Okay. I think this is enough for these questions. These answers are enough for the questions. So let's move on to the next one. The next question is, when was the last external quality assessment conducted for the internal audit function of yours? This is very important, actually, Warren, because we are going to talk about this, because we need a strategy for that. Internal audit functions need a strategy. So we will see who is familiar about these strategies. Oh, surprisingly, it has never been done before. Has 11
Wow.
at this point. Wow, yeah, it's surprising for me. What about you?
Go ahead, Martin, you want to hit your thoughts first,
Yeah,
or
no, it is quite surprising, and then it would have been actually quite good to get some background information as to certain of the reasons as to why it hasn't been done before. The trend that I normally see is more towards it has been done, but some of them more than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
A lot of the reasons behind the delay in performing EQA is related to cost and sometimes the readiness of the internal audit function. So it would have been good to get to the background of some of these things.
Sorry, Martin, we cannot hear you all.
Probably do a detailed survey on
Martin, check your microphone. It was
Yes, please.
there
I
you
will.
go.
Okay, it's better. Yeah.
Back. I'm gonna try with the headphones as well, similar to you.
Yeah, these are IIA headphones. So IIA brand headphones. Only kidding. So I take a little different view than Martin on this. I'm really not surprised about this because the intel that we get, and we don't have any surveys or anything, is that most departments are not doing quality assessments. I don't know what the percentage is around the world, but the feedback we get, and there's no statistical backup on this, is that most departments are not doing quality assessments. So part of what we're trying to do, and Martin in his practice, is elevating internal audit quality around the world. So our job is to, like we're doing with this webinar, is to promote the benefits of doing quality assessments.
Yeah.
And not only because it's required in the standards, it's because it's the right thing to do for departments to ensure that they can demonstrate that they're a well-performing quality department. But this sort of doesn't really doesn't surprise me, because the anecdotal feedback I get from many people that we talk to at conferences is that a lot of companies are not embracing this, and a lot of companies are not embracing the standards as well. So I don't know what that percentage is. I don't know if it's but from this survey, it seems to be something that I've seen. So just as my view.
Okay, so it's nice to start with this question then, because we had been going to talk about why external assessment is important for the department internal audit function. So now it's a reason for us to talk about this, Warren.
Yes.
So I would like to start my questions with your team, actually, because you are giving very extensive external quality services all around the world. And we will also start to do this in Turkey, as I said in the beginning. So first of all, why it is important to conduct an external assessments for the internal audit departments, and how about your team? Tell us about your team. How do you do this? What kind of services you provide in terms of quality assessments?
Okay, well, let's start with my team, and then we'll get into the whys, because I'm sure Martin has a lot of thoughts on the whys. Internal audit, IIA Quality Services is part of Global. We have a roster of over 35 folks that work for us on a contract basis. Most of them are all ex-chief audit executives that are retired, that have been doing this a long time, so they have a lot of knowledge in many industries and relative to the standards and doing quality assessments. So we assist, well, we actually perform the quality assessments for our clients, but we also provide them with advice and assistance, short of what Martin probably does, in helping them be more effective. The services we offer we do three things. We do external quality assessments, where we do all the work. We do the independent validation of the self-assessments. In that case, the client does the full assessment using the quality assessment manual, which Martin is very familiar with, I'm sure. And then we do the independent validation of that. And the thing that we're doing this year is a lot of gap assessments for the new standards. So we're providing them with basically a roadmap to what they need to do for each standard to be in conformance with the new standards. So that's overview of what we do. We have a very experienced group all over the world. We have assessors all over the world and we do work all over the world. So it's exciting to partner with Turkey to get this going, and we deal with a ton of the affiliates this way. So let's move to the next question. The why is important to do the quality assessment. So there's a couple of reasons. One is that it's required by the standards. So you can never say that you're in conformance with the standards if you don't do a external quality assessment, either a self-assessment, independent validation, or a full external quality assessment. I remember that I was on the standards board when that self-assessment came in. That was in the 2000s. So, but anyway, and a gap assessment does not count as an external quality assessment for the standards. So that's the first reason. The second reason is it protects the department. So in some cases, things go wrong in a company, and the first thing they do is they look at the internal audit department. And especially in US, the regulators are really hot on finding anything they can find. So if your department, and I'm sure this is international as well, if your department is not in conformance with the standards, because the standards are a recognized international criteria for how you conduct internal audits, that can expose you to some liability and some negative publicity and all that other stuff. So that's really the important reason. Not, they're both important to do a quality assessment. Martin, anything for you to add on that?
Yeah, thanks, Warren. The first one, the reason why we're having external quality assessments is the standards require them. But that's not the main reason from my point of view as to why we have it. It's because we want that independent perspective on whether we are actually doing what we're supposed to be doing from a CAE perspective. Are we conforming to the standards? While we might believe we do everything right, that different perspective sometimes opens up a point of view that we haven't thought about before. So it's a little bit of an outside perspective that comes into our internal audit functions. In addition to that, there's views and ways and means that other functions do audits that might be more effective and efficient than our own internal audit functions. And we're not always aware of those ways and means to do things, where an external assessor comes in and gives guidance and recommendations and advice, not only for conforming to our internal audit standards, but also for purposes of effectiveness and efficiency of our internal audit functions. And I think a lot of the value add lies within that one. So while we want to conform to the standards for EQA perspectives, there's a lot of quality aspects that can come from an independent assessor's side with all of that experience that they bring along to the table.
And just to add to that, part of the reporting that we do, and I'm sure Martin probably does that as well, is we identify not only the gaps in conformance, but we also identify improvement opportunities, and we also identify best practices, because a lot of times the external assessment is used by the CAE as almost an appraisal to the board.
Yeah.
So there's different different CAEs in different positions. Some CAEs have a good relationship with the board, and this is just reaffirming their service. And others may have a shaky relationship with the board and the audit committee, which there's a whole that happens where you need to demonstrate that you're a well-performing department. So that's another reason to use the reporting on this. So we've seen it all. So
See,
Absolutely.
Warren, you mentioned about 3 different ways of giving these services, but I have one question there. The gap analysis. Do you think that the gap analysis request will increase during this period after the standards? After the change on the standards.
Well, we've seen that already. So.
Oh, agree.
And
Okay.
I'll talk about this a little later. But what we've seen is that a lot of first of all, a lot of the companies are accelerating their quality assessments into 24 just so they can do it under the current standards.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is it gives them another 5-year window to implement the standards and also be able to say they're in conformance, because they can say they're in conformance if they had a 24 QA against the current standards. But what we're seeing now is a lot of our clients are doing the current year 24 quality assessment, and then right after that we're doing the gap assessment for them for the new standards. Mm-hmm. So they're 2 separate engagements. So there's 2 separate reports, 2 separate deliverables. And then we're also seeing a lot of, and this hasn't happened yet because it's sort of still early in the year, but we think what's going to happen towards the end of the year is a lot of companies will probably want to have a gap assessment done in 24 so they can be ready in 25 for their quality assessment. We've seen a little bit of that right now, but at this point in the year, most of the departments are opting to accelerate their QAs because remember, it's at least once every 5 years. It's not at least once every 5 years. So we're seeing right now that a lot of them want to accelerate, but we anticipate as we get later on in the year, there's going to be people are going to realize that, hey, we need to do this. So I think we're going to be doing a lot of gap assessments towards the end of the year with the quality assessment going into 25.
Mm-hmm. So what I understood is the standards are already changed, but it will be required external assessment from the beginning of next year, right? So this is why they need a strategy for this timing, right? So
exactly.
they have to decide, okay, we are going to talk about this, but before that, I really want to know that what has mainly changed in the standard, considering whole picture, not only the quality assessment, but just briefly, what has mainly changed? What is most important for you, in your opinion? What was the most important change on the standards?
All right. So what I'll do is I'm going to share the screen. And,
sure.
And Martin, do you want to go through this as far as the key changes?
I'll be happy to do that. Thank you very much, Warren. So I'm going to go through this summary of changes in a moment, but I think one of there's actually 2 main things that has changed in terms of standards, except for the entire structure that has changed, which is quite significant.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're not seeing any attribute or performance standards anymore. I think the objectives of the standards is completely changed in terms of the fact that it is now a principles-based approach. We're looking at focusing on principles, obviously with the underlying rules and the standards that supports those principles. That's the one main thing. And the second one is, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, is the focus on quality has changed significantly. And I've got a feeling that is because of the fact that in our current standards, this is from an EQA perspective, in our current standards, it's not that difficult to conform to the current standards, but
no.
The current standards, conformance doesn't mean that an internal audit function is working effectively. And our new standards are trying to put that front and center, that yes, you can conform, but now you also have to perform in order to be seen as a value-adding area for our organization. And we get into the purpose in a moment. So just as a summarization of the changes, The first one is that simplification and streamlining of the standards. Our current IPPF has got a number of different elements: the definition, the mission, the standards themselves, the code of ethics, the core principles. It's got implementation guides, and all 6 of those elements has been consolidated into one document, which is now called our Global Internal Audit Standards. In addition to that, it has taken that the code of ethics, and it's enriched the ethics and professionalism standards by adding a new professional care principle into that domain. I'll get into the domains at the moment, but you can see on the right-hand side, top side of your screen, just a brief outline of what the Global Internal Audit Standards looks like. And added to that, it's including considerations for implementation. So it gives an explanation of the how to achieve the intent of the standards and the principle, as well as examples of evidence of conformance. So it doesn't mean that you have to do those things, but it just gives you some of those examples. It's got a lot of new content in there. For example, the first domain, which talks about our purpose of internal auditing. And it's a little bit of a combination of the current definition and the mission of internal auditing, but it puts it in a more understandable way so that we can explain to our stakeholders and explain to our the people that plays a role in internal auditing what internal auditing is really about and what we are trying to achieve. Well, we moved on a slide.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sticky fingers. You tell me when I need to.
Don't worry.
Don't worry, Martin.
In addition to that, it's got an expanded explanation of what board means, because everywhere in the standards it refers to board. And a lot of organizations would say, but I'm internal audit, I don't report to a board, I report to an audit committee or to someone else. So there was a little bit of confusion and people that interpreted that differently. So that was clarified and expanded on significantly. So the new definition of board within the glossary of the standards really includes everything that a board could present. It's added, we've got that added implementations, we've got considerations for nuances of the public sector, where there might be different approaches in public sector for internal audit. So there's a whole appendix on the public sector, as well as some nuances for smaller internal audit functions, which just clarifies a little bit of how the standards are applicable to everyone, and this is how you do it in those nuances. Some of the changes and clarifications are that there's a clarified role of chief audit executives in managing the internal audit function. So entire domain as to how the chief audit executive should go about managing the internal audit function. Whereas in our current standards, it's mainly focused on standard 2000. This has got an entire domain with principles and underlying standards. So it really helps chief audit executives significantly to better manage their internal audit functions. And then the most important one, like I mentioned earlier, is that incorporation of performance requirements to ensure quality of internal audit services, where we see quality as the combination of conformance and performance. So in order for an internal audit function to be effective. So that's the main summary of changes. There's obviously a lot of other things that we can go into details with, but that's going to take about a day to go through.
Well, thank you. I think it's enough to have the overall picture, but we can move on more details, especially for quality, because I think the sentences you said about performance is the most important thing here for the assessments. But before I go there, just one more question. Do you think now it's easier or it's more difficult to assess? What do you think?
We could talk about this, I guess, when we get into it, but I think it's going to make things more complex for us, especially on the performance side. I know we're developing what that criteria is right now, but our anticipation is that the performance side of this is going to be a lot more complex than it was for the conformance. And again, we raised the bar. As Martin mentioned, the bar was raised significantly, because now we've seen departments that are very well in conformance, but they're lousy. They're not good. So they don't they don't really provide any value. So now we have to assess the value, and that criteria is being worked on with the new QA manual. And there's other things that we would need to consider, and we could talk about this, I guess, later on as we get into the
Okay.
president.
Okay, sure. So let's move on more details and talk about the implications of the new standards. What are the implications of new standards for quality, domain by domain? Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
I'll defer to my expert on the standards, Martin. He's the current expert. He's been living this for how long now? 3 years, roughly?
It's been just over 3 years, Warren. So yeah, it's going on 3.5. So it's
And we're going to test him later. We're going to ask him what specific wording is for on some of the paragraphs, but we'll save that for that question comes up later. So go
I
ahead.
might lose connection somewhere along the line. Now, always when I talk about the standards, I tend to mention that it took me about 5 years to fully get into the current standards and know exactly what is where and know the standards numbering and be able to refer to them offhand. Now everybody's asking me since the release of January 9, what is this standard? And I go, oh, word, what is that standard? And I have to go and just check, make sure what the standard numbers are still. But give me time, I'll get there. Just as a brief overview on the global internal audit standards, as I've mentioned, it is now not, we don't have the attribute and the performance standards anymore. We've broken it, well, we've put it into 5 domains, and the 5 domains consists of 15 principles, and underneath those principles, we've got 52 standards as well. Now, domain 1, the purpose of internal auditing, that's the elevator speech as to what internal auditing is and what we're all about and how we can help, or how we help an organization to be better and to achieve their goals and standards and be more sustainable. That domain 1 also outlines some of the key considerations for effective internal audit functions to enable them to do that, to help an organization be more effective, more sustainable, achieve their objectives. The second domain is the ethics and professionalism domain, which has got components of our current code of ethics, but also of the current 1000 standards, the attribute standards. And again, I'm not going to go into details with that, but in terms of number 4, exercise due professional care, there's a standard that comes into play that states that we have to conform to the global internal audit standards. Some of the main ones that focuses on quality, and I want to say main ones, but quality, you'll find out quality throughout the standards. It's I think I mentioned it last time, Warren, the previous webinar, that I think quality is mentioned 18 times in the current standards and more than 150 times in the new standards. So it just goes to show. But the main principles and standards that focuses on quality is the first one in domain 3 is the governing of the internal audit function, which contains rules for that a CAE must follow, but also essential conditions for our board/audit committees, as well as senior management. In order for an internal audit function to be effective, we need support from boards and senior management, and that it contains some of those elements. We'll get into the details in a moment. Specifically, principle number 8, which is overseen by the board, and principle number 12 in the managing the internal audit function, enhancing quality. Those are the 2 main ones that speaks about quality and how internal audit functions needs to be effective. If we can move on to the next one, Warren. Yeah. So just a little bit of details on the quality standard. Like I mentioned, there's certain requirements, and the requirements are for the CAE to get to. So the first requirement is that the CAE must develop, implement, and maintain a quality assurance and improvement program. And it's been fleshed out a little bit in the standards as to what a QIP needs to include. One of those elements is our external quality assessment, and another element is our internal quality assessment. But in addition to that, our QIP also needs to look at where where is our internal audit function at, and where should we be? How can we enhance quality on a continuous basis, not only through conformance with the standards, but to enhance the maturity of our internal audit function on an ongoing basis. So in terms of that development of the QIP that we need to present to senior management and the board, it also the requirement is also that the CAE must communicate the details of that QIP, including the results of the internal quality assessment, to the board and senior management, where the requirement for the external quality assessments needs to be communicated the moment that the process has been completed.
May I add one thing on that, Martin? I think
Absolutely.
I think it also says that they need to report any gaps or any corrective actions. Is that part of this as well?
Yes, you're 100% right. Warren, if an internal quality assessment is performed and there's any gaps in terms of conformance to the standards, which includes gaps in terms of the achievement of the principles, that those needs to be reported to the board and senior management, as well as any corrective actions that the internal audit function needs to take in order to address those gaps.
Okay, move on.
Yes, please.
Oh, that's part of a little bit of essential conditions. I think you talked out some of these already.
I did already speak to some of those. You're 100% right. So, yeah, just to emphasize that is that in terms of the oversight of an internal audit function, there's certain aspects that needs to be addressed by a board and senior management in order to ensure that an internal audit function is as effective as it can be within our organizations. Without that support, internal audit functions will struggle to be effective.
Yeah.
So if in relation to the quality, the board needs to, in some cases, your audit committee needs to approve the internal audit function's performance objectives at least annually. And you'll read more about the performance measures within Standard 12.2. See, I remember one of these standards at least. Within Standard 12.2, it talks about performance measures and that your internal audit function needs to set performance objectives that they want to achieve during the course of the year, 2 years, 3 years. And in all likelihood, those performance objectives will be aligned to the strategy of the internal audit function that needs to be set, and that you'll find in principle number 9 again. Those performance objectives are good. That's the one aspect of it. And I'll get into performance a little bit more in a moment. The second essential condition is that our board/audit committees needs to assess the internal audit function's effectiveness and efficiency, at least on an annual basis as well. And they get that information through our internal quality assessments, and at least once every 5 years through our external quality assessments. Senior management, again, buy-in, provide that support for the internal audit function to enable them to achieve their performance objectives. And they need to participate with our board/audit committees in relation to the annual assessments of the internal audit function as well as the CAE. There's sometimes, I just want to pause there for a moment, because there is sometimes a little bit of a debate in terms of quality, that is performance plus conformance, and how does this performance objectives link into that performance requirement when we talk about quality. And the point that we made in the discussion, one of the task force meetings, is that the performance should be linked to your performance objectives, but performance is actually incorporated into the entire standards already. There's elements of performance incorporated in terms of the principles. And when you read a principle and you achieve a principle, then there is an expectation that you are actually performing. That achievement of principle will not be possible without an internal audit function actually performing. So your performance will be evaluated throughout. And in addition to that performance of the achievement of your principles, there's also an element of performance objectives that needs to be set.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Another standard that we have within our domain 3 under the oversight is the external quality assessments, which in the current standards, it forms part of our standard 1300, the QIP. And it is basically under the control of the CAE. Now, it doesn't, the standard 8.4 doesn't take away that control. The chief audit executive still needs to discuss with the board and senior management the requirements for an external quality assessment, but it now becomes the board's kind of decision. It's one of the essential conditions that they need to understand what is necessary for the organization and for the internal audit function to assist that internal audit function to be effective. And one of those things could be an external quality assessment, and they need to decide on whether they want an external quality assessment only once every 5 years, or maybe more frequently if their discussions comes to that outcome. So the board actually coordinates with senior management in terms of the scope and the frequency of the EQA. They also need to make sure that the EQA team has got the necessary qualifications and experience in order to add value to the internal audit function. It doesn't help if an external quality assessor doesn't have experience or skills or knowledge of the standards for them to do an external quality assessment. And the board must make sure that those qualifications and experience is evident when they propose to do an external quality assessment, or when they're requested to do an external quality assessment. One of the new requirements is that at least one of the team members of the external quality team that is present on an ongoing basis must be a CIA qualified person. They must hold that CIA qualification.
Martin,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as far as I know, your team now, the assessors in your team have all CAs now, right? So
My team, yeah. So I'm part
I mean
of
the
this
quality service, IA quality
Oh,
service.
IA Global. That's
Yeah.
Warren's.
Yeah, IA Global, there's all our assessors are CIAs. Plus,
Yeah.
we require all of them to have a certificate in the IA is offering a certificate in quality assessment. There's a program, and you take a test and you get the certificate. So all our assessors have that certificate, and any future assessors we bring in will have that certificate. Plus, they're all CIAs. And a bunch of others also. They all have a whole bunch of, like me and Martin. We have, we just we have 2 cards that we give out because our credentials are so big. So anyway, there is the program the IA is offering for a certificate in quality assessment. All our folks are required to have that, and a CIA. One more point on the frequency. So I know it's at least every 5 years. So when I was CAE at New Jersey Transit, we used to do ours every 3 years, because in the US, we used to follow the government auditing standards, which requires a 3-year quality assessment. So we did it every 3 years instead of every 5 years. We followed both. And I know some of the clients we're talking to now, the board requires them to do it more frequently than every 5 years. So, and actually a lot of the people I talk to, they think 5 years is too much. I mean, I know Martin, you and me that do these things, we'd be happy to do them every 3 years. But the consensus I get from talking with folks at conferences and events is that most CAEs think that it's 5 years is too much.
Yeah.
So
Especially, Warren,
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, good. No, good. Yeah.
Especially in the larger internal audit functions, where you've got a number of internal auditors within that function. Those CAEs normally requires them more frequently. It's the smaller internal audit functions that says once every 5 years is fine. Those with 5 or less internal auditors, because they've got a better grasp on what's going on within their internal audit functions in general. Or that's what I've found. But in terms of the qualifications, I'm one of the members of the South African IISA team of EQAs. and we've got similar requirements for credentials before we can provide EQ, or before that we can become team leaders or provide EQA services. And in addition to that, before you can get onto that team, you have to have been a member of a team for at least 5 EQAs before you can become a team leader.
So both our teams are pretty well credentialed. That's what,
Sure.
that provides us with the ability to go in and add value as far as best practices and situations that people see. So that's so at least in South Africa and IA Global, that we are very, very experienced people that do this stuff. Now, anybody can take the course and do one if they want, but the value here is, like Martin mentioned, is that being able to advise CAEs on best practices, and to do that, you need to have experience. You need to have seen things in the past.
Yep, 100% right.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
can we continue? I think there's only 1 or 2 more slides.
Yep.
All right, so in terms of the oversight by the board, in domain 3, those are the 2 main standards that relates to quality. And if we move on to domain 4, which is managing the internal audit function, there's an entire principle on quality. And underneath that principle, we've got 3 standards. The 12.1, which talks about our internal quality assessment, which forms part of our methodology, our QIP, which forms part of our methodology. And at least on an annual basis, it's expected that an internal audit function evaluates their processes and systems and provides information to the board as to whether they believe that they are conforming to the standards. But as we all know, sometimes we're not that objective when we evaluate ourselves, and therefore we need those external quality assessments just to confirm our thoughts of our processes. In terms of standard 12.2, which is those performance objectives that I've just mentioned, 12.2 just expands and explains a little bit as to what is meant by those performance measurements, and that our CAEs must develop objectives to evaluate the internal audit function's performance. What they base those objectives on will be discussed with the board, but I would think that those objectives would be at least aligned to our global internal audit standards, and maybe some kind of a maturity assessment and strategy that the internal audit function has. But be that as it may, that's a discussion between the CAE and the board as to what those performance objectives needs to be, and those needs to be approved by the board as well. And the second one is that the CAE must develop those performance measurement methodology to assess that on an ongoing basis. And that performance measurement methodology would probably form part of your QIP, because it talks about that continuous improvement of the internal audit function, and should promote everyone in the internal audit function needs to be aware of what the contents of the QIP is, and that should promote that drive towards continuous improvement for all the internal auditors.
Okay. All right, next slide.
Yeah, I'm happy. You can always chip in when you want, Warren.
Well, let me chip in. Let me chime in on the performance metrics if I can. This is a very hot debate on performance metrics, because that's not the only thing we use to determine if the department is performing well. So when you talk about performance metrics, there's really 2 types of metrics in general. There's activity-based metrics and there's performance-based metrics. So activity-based metrics will tell you how many audits you've done, and how many people have how many audits you've done, maybe how many findings, but that doesn't really tell you how well you're performing. So that's the thing here. So the board has to be aware of what it means, what success criteria looks like for a department to be deemed a well-performing department. So there's some of those things like measuring things in the department that tie in to the overall strategy of the company, let's say. So maybe it's the number of audits that are done based on the key risks in the company. I mean, there's tons of these things because it depends on the situation. Like at New Jersey Transit, we were required to do construction audits, construction contract audits. So one of the metrics we had was recoveries of funds for those construction audits. That's performance-based, but that's only one thing. That doesn't tell me how well we're doing on other things. So this whole idea of the metrics is only one aspect of determining how well a department is performing. So there's other things that come into play, and one is like before we do a quality assessment, we do surveys of the stakeholders. So those surveys, one of the questions is, did internal audit add value to your department, to your company? So that's another aspect of performance that will all come into this whole thing about coming up with a conclusion on performance. The other thing are the interviews that are done during the quality assessment. We interview key stakeholders. We interview the members of the department, the board, the CEO, all those types of folks. So that's another element of performance. But as far as that all adds to this performance measurements requirement, because that just gives us comfort that the right things are being measured. So what we would do in a quality assessment is, if we don't think there's the right measures in place, then we would recommend best practices for other things to measure. And there's a whole array of things that you can measure. You know, maybe it's the percentage of the audit recommendations that are implemented, which tells you that folks are listening. But that's not the only thing. So the point here is that there's a lot of things that go into this. Performance measures are just one thing that helps an assessor determine the performance level of the department. And Martin, I'm sure you have things to add on this, so go ahead.
Absolutely. So you opened a can of worms there, Warren, because I had a question the other day in terms of performance objectives, and one of the CAEs said, but what if we set low bar performance objectives and we achieve them? Does that mean we conform to the standards? Does that mean that we achieve the principles? And the short answer is actually absolutely no. You might conform to this standard, but you're definitely not going to achieve the principles. The reason being, as these are talking about performance measures and performance objectives, which is fantastic, but there's performance aspects built in throughout the standards. And do yourselves a favor and go and read the principles themselves, and you'll see that the principles themselves are not rules. It's not you do this. It's you have to do that well. You have to follow those rules well, and you have to perform accordingly in order to achieve those principles. So there's different aspects of performance that comes into play when assessors are going to assess performance, which makes the assessor's job a little bit more difficult, but it means that the internal audit functions themselves also needs to focus on really adding that amount of value to an organization in order to, at the end of the day, achieve that purpose that we are all working towards.
It sounds it will be very hard for the assessors in terms of evaluating these measures and metrics, I think, in the next periods. So I think we have still 5 minutes, but before we close the session, actually I have thousands of questions, but I will choose two, the most important two ones. How about rating, Warren, Martin? What kind of rating you used in your assessments? And actually, what I wonder is, I understand it will be changed, right? So how you will compare it with the previous ones? And one more question is also related with that. You mentioned about the timing strategy. So what do you think about this timing strategy? What companies should do before they come to the next year if their last external assessment was, for example, 4 years ago? So what they are going to do, you have already mentioned, but we can take your answer. We can get your answers with your recommendations.
Okay, I'll take the second one first, Martin, while you're thinking about the first question on ratings. This is the strategy that we see. If your QA was due in 2024, folks are conducting them as scheduled because it's under the current standards. And then, like I mentioned, they're considering doing a gap assessment for the new standards. And those that we're engaging in doing the gap assessment right after we do the QA. Two separate engagements, two separate reports. So that's if it's due in 24. If your QA is due in 25 and beyond, folks are accelerating them to 24, we see, and then doing a gap assessment for 25 at the same time. So that's what we're seeing now. If your QA is due in 25 or beyond, some folks we are working with to do a gap assessment in 24 or early 25, and then doing the QA right after that. So those are pretty well the different options you may have. But a lot of folks are continuing, a lot of clients are doing the gap assessment because they want a detailed roadmap on what they need to do to move into the new standards. And it's interesting, probably about 30% of the clients that we talk to, their board is requiring an external assessment on the gaps and a report. So, and some are not, but so that's sort of where these are some of the strategies to go on that we're seeing now. Okay, Martin, you want to talk a little bit about the ratings?
Yeah, Gosner, you're right. We are busy with discussions in terms of the ratings, and it hasn't been finalized yet. So this is one of the things that I can't state what we're going to do because there's been no final decision on it
Okay,
yet.
good question then. Good
It
question.
is. But I'm going to give you a little bit of background in terms of those discussions, and it's the reason why it's taking a little bit longer in deciding what we're going to do is because we want to integrate the conformance and the performance. We want to give one rating to an internal audit function. We don't want to tell an internal audit function, okay, you're generally conforming, but you're not effective, or you are very effective, but you're only partially conforming, those types of things. We want to give internal audit functions one rating and tell them, listen, you are achieving the purpose of internal auditing, or you are partially achieving the purpose, some kind of an idea like that. So we're still fine-tuning the final ratings that there will be, but it will not be significantly different to what we currently have.
So it will be comparable anyway.
Comparable,
with
yes.
previous
We're contemplating a 4-level rating instead of a 3-level rating, whereas we want to look at a top-level rating where we say you are fully you are achieving our purpose and you're fully in conformance, rather than generally in conformance, because generally in conformance means that there could be still significant gaps in your internal audit function, but you are generally conforming with the standards. So we're very much in deep discussions with regard to that.
Well, the key to that is the depth, how you define that. So people, right, that's the issue, is how you define what that means. Like generally conforms is pretty clear, right? But to try and incorporate performance into that, I think the key there is the definition of how you, how you define these things. So that's probably the thing that's complicated about this.
Yeah, you're right. So time is almost up, but we have one question from one of our participants. Maybe we may answer her in just 2 minutes if you have time. Can you see the question, Martin?
No, we can't.
I may read it. I may read it. Okay. Hilal Burcu Keskin asks, in the new standards, are there any defined performance criteria and objectives that can be used for all internal departments, regardless of their size? So,
well, Martin, I think you should take that one because that talks about, I guess, small departments and large departments, and I think.
You're throwing all the difficult ones to me, but it's fine. I'll do it.
Hey, that's why you get paid the big money here.
No, currently there is not, but and I'm not again 100% sure if this will happen, but I'm confident that the institute will provide some guidance as to criteria for performance objectives and set how to go about setting performance objectives, as well as the related metrics as to achieve those performance objectives. But it will be very difficult for them to provide a universal performance objective. Maybe one of the universal ones could be something like our internal audit function will conform to the global internal audit standard, something like that. But it's going to be very difficult because it depends on, so there's too many variables involved. Size is not the only one. It can be the maturity of the internal audit function. It can be the industry. It can be even the environment where that internal audit function is, that all of those aspects or elements has got an effect on what the specific performance objectives will be. So I'm sure there will be guidance coming out, giving you some idea, and maybe some of those guidance will include examples of performance objectives that can be used. But I don't think that they'll specifically go out and say, these should be your performance objectives.
Well, there is a practice guide that's up on the IA website on setting performance objectives. But I've done sessions in the past on how to set performance metrics. And the key thing is, like I mentioned before, do the objectives demonstrate to a third party that has no knowledge of your department whether you're performing or not? So that's the standard. So it gets into, are these activity based or are they results based? So and it differs in every department. Because like I said, I mean, our objective was to recover funds. Not every department is to recover funds. Some departments is to limit the exposure, let's say, for Sarbanes-Oxley in the US. You know, so the point is that you have to sit back and say, okay, does this metric demonstrate performance to someone that has no idea of what we do? You know, an external party. That's sort of the standard that I do in the presentations, because we want, you know, and then if the answer is yep, that's something good, but it's you can't define those because it's different for every single department.
You're right. Yeah. Okay. 1 hour passed very quickly, I don't believe, but it's obvious that we should have one more session maybe in the second half of the year, when the metrics and other details are more detailed on your hand then. So thank you very much for your attendance, accepting our invitation, and having with us today. I'm very nice to meet you, and hope to see you again in maybe next sessions. Martin, Warren.
We'll be happy to do that. Yep.
Well, I'm happy to do that as well, Gosner. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Warren, it's been a pleasure. I'll speak
Martin,
to you.
You get better every single time.
It flowed more. It had a nice flow to it this time. Thanks, Warren.
Well, I set you up pretty good, didn't I?
The previous time.
No, I set you up good this time. That's what I do. I mean, you know my answers, I know your answers, but we sort of